Yeah, it is. So it's a pleasure to welcome all of you and those of you out there in the world of space and time to the Bard Graduate Center for this afternoon's lunchtime talk delivered by Frédéric Joulian of the School of Advanced Studies, the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, the Centre Norbert Elias in Marseille. And his talk titled today is Non-Human Aesthetics, a Trans-Species Analysis. And this is the second installment of what is kind of 18 hours immersion in the highlights, one might say the peaks of current French scholarship on material culture. Last night, Professor Joulian, who was for 10 years also the head of the editorial head of the journal Technique et Culture, delivered here a kind of conspectus of the 20th century discussions of material culture in France, starting from Mauss, moving through André de Roy-Gourhan, the contrast with Lévi-Strauss, to Robert Cresswell and the founding of the laboratoire in Paris that gave birth then to the journal Technique et Culture. And then he took us through a history of the journal and its development and some of the questions involved, both on the intellectual side and the presentational side of producing a journal of that level of quality, both intellectually and materially. Today he's going to take us more deeply into his own work as a scholar, a good portion of which has been focused on West Africa and the culture of chimpanzees. And as some of you may know, those who are careful readers of the journal know that already in 1994 it devoted an issue to the question of the human, non-human position on material culture. And today we'll have a chance, I think, to stretch our minds here at the last research event of the year to think about the question of really whether we humans are the only ones who make things. So it's a great pleasure to invite Professor Joulian to the podium.
Thank you everybody for this possibility to talk about my own research. I will try to retrace, as I did yesterday night, different elements of my work and of some recent discoveries we made in Western Africa, and old discoveries too. Some are unpublished, so it still varies, but doesn't matter. For me, it's a good occasion to disseminate some results in different way. So I will go very, very superficially on some points. So please ask questions at the end if you want, because I put too many slides probably. First, I want to again to give some example where we started with André Leroy-Gourhan in Pincevent, which is a school site, field research site in Paris area, Magdalenian campsite where I did excavate with his team at the beginning of the 80s. And we did a lot of experimentation with prehistoric tools, and we copied and some of my colleagues developed microware analysis to know the different uses of tools with skins, with different materials. And that's a picture of André Leroy-Gourhan. It was just before he died, during the mid-80s. And we did some functional analysis of the tools. But André Leroy-Gourhan, as I told yesterday night, was very interested by aesthetical dimension of tools, not only functional. And for him, there is no clear-cut differences between what he called functional aesthetics. He uses kind of expression to describe the link between form and function, and some strong tendencies in human evolution of some tools. This kind of aesthetical question was present for, of course, prehistoric art, but also for very primitive tools. This one is not a primitive tool, it's an experimental tool made by one of my colleagues, Jean-Michel Jeuneste. But what we noticed with André Louragourand and our experiments, he wasn't very pleased by the result of our tools. They were too clumsy, they lacked some style and some functional aesthetics for him. He was always interested by details, functional details. For example, this picture he took of Japanese wall, and for him there was no differences between basic physical elements in terms of style and decorative elements in terms of styles too. He was interested by both sides of objects, matters and decoration at the same time. Why I started by I use this type of questionings from André Louragourand and from myself to apply it to animals' world and to animals' objects. And I try to combine functional aspects and meanings of the objects for the animals. I mean animals, primates, chimpanzee in particular. And I studied objects, representation, I mean social representation of tools for animals, and gestural meanings by animals. So in this talk I will try to raise some question about non-functional dimension of animal tools. Since beginning of the 70s, we were just facing a new situation. Primitive mans are more and more animals, and primates are more and more humans. And now we are talking about non-human primates. If we think about the expression non-human primates, it's kind of heresy. It's kind of paradoxal expression, and there is a new status made to animals. And you have on left picture a gorilla, on right a chimpanzee, and just between I put a reconstruction of Lucy, Australopithecus, and she's mixed reconstruction with modern elements. Eyes, for example, are totally modern because you can see the white of the eye of Lucy. So it's something like a chimera. It's not a good reconstruction from my viewpoint. But it means that we are in a very bizarre moment on the animal status. And for example, if we take not a regular and habitual representation of hominid evolution, but the cladistic, like that one, we see that the chimpanzee is closer to man than it's closer to gorillas. In a cladistic modern view of evolution, chimpanzee and human are brother species and closest than the gorillas. I don't come into detail, but that gives you a new way to think about evolution and comparison between man and primates. We are primates, and we share a lot of cognitive capacities. Orangutan, gorillas, chimpanzee are able to know themselves in face of a mirror. There is capacity of attribution of intention, attribution of emotion, empathy. So we share a lot of common characteristics, and we need to think in terms of hominoid and not only of hominid clear-cut separation with primates. That's one of the points I wanted to start. Of course, at the same time, we are still dealing with some clear-cut conception of humanity related to stone tools making. For example, this chopper, I did excavation, archaeological excavation in Ivory Coast, and we founded all the one-style tools in that part of Africa. And this type of tool, because it's regular, because it's symmetrical, was interpreted in terms of great intelligence and great monitoring of tasks. But at the same time, we were able to teach some chimpanzee how to flint, how to flake stone tools. Studies made by Nicola Toth in America long time ago. And we have to think about the potentiality of the animals and the actual behavior really realized in live condition. Of course, all those type of information and behavior have to be analyzed and replaced in a bigger scope and in a more intelligent comparative attitude. Of course, we know now that chimpanzees are able to hunt, and they do hunt without tools, because tools were just related to the idea of weapon, to the idea of cutting, to the idea of hunting, and the process of immunization was related to the evolution of tools and weapons. And chimpanzees show a different model. They show they are able to hunt other primates, red colobus in that case, and they do hunt without any harms, without any tools or weapons. And it means that to study objects and to study techniques, we need to open the range and to look at other different behavior. In this case, hand-clasp grooming, which is a particular habit developed by chimpanzee in Maale, in Tanzania, and published by Bill McGrew and Caroline Totin in Man. That was the first main debate between anthropologists and primatologists. From my side, I tried to develop the idea of Marcel Mauss on body techniques and applied body techniques concepts to great apes, in that case with orangutan. And we observed orangutan in Paris Garden Zoo doing some very strange innovation. They were able to knot with some strings, and it was the first case we observed orangutan able to make knots. But so they don't use the rope, they just knot by we don't know exactly the reason, but they are able to realize very complex and very motor task. They are able to use their own body as some bridge between one tree and another one. They are able to develop a lot of different tasks which are different from one community to another. That's the second element. They are able to do some very complex tasks, and those complex tasks are disseminated to future generation, and they are different from other communities. It's the reason why I'm talking about traditions. Some of my colleagues talk about animal cultures, but I'm quite careful with the idea of animal culture. I disagree on many points, but I don't want to come into this kind of debates. It would be too long. But by describing different communities and different traditions among chimpanzees, we discover that they were able to make tools, as you can see in that case, We observe also some strange variation, for example in termite sticks from Ivory Coast, again, northeast Ivory Coast. Chimpanzees are using different sticks and the same spot. Before we found that, some of my colleagues thought that chimpanzees in East Africa were using wands or twigs to fish for termites, as Jane Goodall showed many times. In Central Africa, they were using different technologies with stick of that type on the second picture, and they were perforating the termite mound to get into and to get the termites. It was the second type. And in Senegal and in Guinea, they have a third type. And in Ivory Coast, I found the three types at the same spot. And I started to question the functional meaning of those sticks, and to question the difference in terms of style. That was one of the first work I did in Ivory Coast. The second one was on nut cracking and the use of stone tools by chimpanzee. And I did different survey, different study in different sites, in Monogaga, in Monyenyukwe, in Monimba, next to Guinea. And I made comparison of workplace where the chimpanzee are. I did some archaeology of the chimpanzee, in fact. So I did excavation and survey, and I found different places where the chimpanzee use different tools according to the type of the nut and to the quality of the nut. For example, Panda oleosa, this big nut on the left, is the strongest nut on Earth and requires 2 tons per square centimeter to be opened. So it's very difficult to acquire the ability to open it, and requires a stone tool, and sometimes a stone tool and a stone anvil. A root anvil, sometimes it's not enough to be able to crack the nut. So it means that the complexity of the task could be very, very great, and it's developed and transmitted, and I observed different variation in different communities. They don't use the same tools, they don't use the same nut, they don't eat it in the same way. So with some excavation I did, I was able to show how long they were using some places, and we discovered that they were cracking nuts on some places for 4 to 500 years time duration. So variability, long-term historical practices. I did some comparison between first hominid stone tools and chimpanzee stone tools, and the one on right was an anvil, then a hammer used by probably an Australopithecus or Homo habilis. We don't know exactly who used it. It came from Olduvai Gorge, and it's quite similar to the left one used by the chimpanzee. So we can observe different animals using the same technologies. It means that first hominid were not only hunters, but are also nut eaters. And I just move to next idea. So we can see differences in a way that chimpanzee can be able to crack. For example, we observe a gender bias. Female chimpanzees are much cleverer than males, and they are able to crack nuts with tools. That's a female chimpanzee in a tree, and she before the fall of the nut at the beginning of the season, the female chimpanzee are able to go in a tree and to crack in the tree, and the male only on ground. For example, that was one of the results. So I said complex task. In some cases, I don't know if we can see. It's not so good. But for example, on this workplace, the chimpanzee use a root of a tree and put an anvil just to make it flat, and use this stone to open those notes. So it means that there is 1, 2, 3 different elements set in the same place, and it means that there is some flexibility in the way to handle with material elements. Flexibility means, cognitive flexibility, and I can use the word affordance to express, because some of my colleagues interpret that in terms of cognitive, superior cognitive capacities of the chimpanzee, but what I try to develop is a minimalistic interpretation of data. And I did some comparison. That's type of tool made by chimpanzee. You see this little cupule, a little cup made by the repetition of the cracking, and I observed some very strange tool made similar shape, but made in wood by the chimpanzee. They usually use this type of tool with, I will take a log of a tree, of a branch like that, and in some sites in Banco, next to Abidjan, I found a particular bias, chimpanzee using regular shape in wood. So that wasn't normal. It wasn't normal behavior for the chimpanzee. In different other sites, I found chimpanzee not cracking the nut, but eating the exocarp, the external part of the nut, or cracking this type of fruit, which is not a nut. And they open this fruit with different kernels inside by smashing it with a tool. This Clinodoxa africana, it's particular fruit from big trees in the forest. I tried to explain that for functional and or ecological reason, and I wasn't able to explain that way. And I go to the idea of a technical milieu, a social and technical milieu. In those communities of chimpanzee, they are using tools regularly, every day. And even when it's a fruit, they are able to crack a fruit, because you crack an orange in the same way. So I came into some bizarre questionings from the field experience. I just moved to another example, taken to crows from Nouvelle-Calédonie, studied by Gavin Hunt, one of my colleagues who works on crow. And what he showed with those crows, they were able to make very standardized and very complex tools. In this case, a hook, and the crow is using this hook to fish for worms in some wood. Or this one made by on palm matter, and you see this kind of pick. But this standardization doesn't equal. Cannot only be interpreted in terms of cognition. It could be interpreted in terms of the capacity of the materials and the particularities of the material. You see, he cut at the beginning of the separation of the different elements of the palm. So the matter itself produce a regular shape. And this hook is at the beginning of a new petiole of the vegetal. So you can have very regular shapes of tools, but they are not obviously in all cases related to grid intelligence, even if there is some standard. Another example came from Guinea. We found some new chimpanzee tools. It's not a tool, it's an object made with several layers of leaves, and people around tell me, how we know that thing? That's a chimpanzee stool. C'est le tabouret du chimpanzé. And it was quite very interesting, because a tabouret, this type of stool, it's related to power, to kingdom, to some people who are very important in the society. And the chimpanzee were making this type of apparatus to sat on during the rainy period. So let's move. So those different examples just push me in a different direction, which is some tools used by chimpanzees. That's France de Waal in chimpanzee politics. It's a fight between this male and this young male, Luit, who was the alpha male, and Yeroen, who was challenging Luit. And he used this huge stone to feel bigger fighting. He didn't use it at all. He don't throw the stone. He was able to throw it, but he just carrying and showing his power with this big stone. So in that case, the stone is quite ambiguous, as it can have a different meaning. So that's not new, because Japanese researcher, Japanese primatologists, since the beginning of the 50s, study macaques with this kind of ideas. And for example, they described how macaques are able to roll stones and to make piles of stones. There is no reason to do that. It's in some custom, macaque custom in Japan are very well studied, and we know some communities where we have specific tasks. So what I want to say with the macaque example, that we think in terms of closeness to human beings with the chimpanzee, but we have to look for a wider range of animals to understand this type of phenomenon. For example, we need to think that without any material elements, or whales or dolphins are able to act on matters. For example, creating bubbles, circles of bubbles, and to trap some fish and to eat them. That's whales but there are several examples from dolphin that can be used in the same way. Okay. So with some anecdotes, and my colleague William Magru talk about anecdotes for this event. Ako is a chimpanzee in Malé, and who hunt a red colobus, as I showed you before, and he kept the tail of the colobus, and he made a knot, and he wore as a necklace, as a collar, this type of elements. So Bill is very careful, and he said it's only an anecdote. Okay, I agree with him, because we have only one case. But if we collect a lot of anecdotes, we can see a new figure of the intelligence, of the behavior of non-human beings. And for example, in Western Africa, we observe, Japanese colleagues observe chimpanzee playing with Irexes, daman, a small mammal who lives in the forest, in trees or in rocks, and they can play before killing and carrying long time, and they can make some dolls with some small elements of wooden elements, and they can, young animals can play as if it is a doll, and they can carry it. So with this type of example, or with use of this kind of feather which is removed from guinea fowl, the chimpanzee is having some close relation to other chimpanzee in sexual exchanges. For example, he can use feather to attract attention of some females. So in that case, objects can be used in terms of communication, but they can be also interpreted in different way, in a way that objects are, and material objects are important for those animals. They play with, they have some pleasure with objects. And we forgot those kind of dimensions. They are very important, they are important for human evolution too. Another example, it's something very strange. I was following a female chimpanzee in Mont-Nignocqué in Ivory Coast, and it was a new chimpanzee in that community. She was just coming from a different community, and she was a new one in Mont-Nignocqué group. And she was very shy because she wasn't habituated to us. And she just left, and we found a workplace where she was cracking nuts. Very strange, because she was making lines with the nut. Usually chimpanzees take one nut or two nuts and crack the nut and eat it. In that case, it was different. She was doing lines and cracking in a sequence. So it's different. It's very difficult to interpret such thing, but it can be interpreted in terms of count. She's able to count, or to sequence his own activity, or in terms of aesthetics, because it's pleasant, it's beautiful for, I don't know, you see, I'm very careful with words, but I leave you this example like that because I cannot interpret in a better way. In Guinea, with one of my PhD students, we worked on nesting with chimpanzee, and the chimpanzee are doing everyday nest. So they are on, in English you say a platform. In some cases they are very high and in trees. Sometimes they are very low. In that part, that's a savanna area environment, forested savanna. And we found a very strange place where chimpanzee accumulated stones. And I interpret that, you know that the chimpanzees just drum, they drum on trees for different purposes, for displaying, to indicate some direction in a group, for different purposes. And in that case, I wasn't able to interpret in a proper way this cumulative activity. A lot of laterite stone accumulated by chimpanzee, and a lot of scarce on the roots of the trees, on the bark, and I interpret that as a drumming activity because there is no nuts at that place, or communication activity. I didn't know. And last year, some of my colleagues put some video traps and they record by night and by day with automatic video recording a lot of different places where I discover. And they found that the chimpanzee were just doing some display and throwing and banging and just leaving the stone in a very cumulative way. And they interpret this type of behavior as kind of cumulative behavior and ritual behavior. I'm not so sure of the interpretation, but it is in the same way. Another example came from Maale or from Bossou. It's how chimpanzee treat their the body of the died infant, and in that case, this female chimpanzee in Bossou lost a baby, and the baby was dried, like mummified, because it was at a dry period of the year, and during 3 months and a half, she carried the dead body of her child, and she lived with. So it was only abandoned after 3 months, and everybody in the community just continuing to play with the dead body. A lot of fleas around the mummy, but it was like a living artifact, a living object, and chimpanzees were interacting with the dead body. So I asked this question from the subject to the object. So, what was the status of this dead body, from a living being to an object? Was it so different than the way we treat cadaver in our societies? We go from a living being to corpse and a cadaver. So I just wanted to give you some ideas like that. So and the link with the first hominid behavior is quite difficult, but some years ago, some of my colleagues in Spain, in La Cima de los Huesos, found pre-Neanderthal beings buried in a big cave, and on the skeleton they found this very particular hand axe with red on the top. I don't remember what type of stone it is, but it was very particular and related to a big amount of I don't remember how many, but it's 40 or more skeleton of people just trapped and buried in a cave. And I just go further. So it was in that case pre-Neanderthal or Homo erectus. We don't know exactly. I did excavation long time ago in La Roche-Loup in Burgundy. It was this kind of breccia at the entrance of a cave, and this breccia was dated from between Neanderthals and Cro-Magnon, that we call Châtel-Peyronien, this typical blade, this Châtel-Peyronien points, and we found it very strange tool. And it's one of the first curiosa described by André Leroi-Gourhan in Artis sur Cure at the end of the 50s, and we refound this kind of similar. It's a micraster. It's a fossil, sea urchin fossil in flint, flint by Neanderthals, and they made kind of chopper with this tool. So that's one of the first, after the first of curiosa from the prehistory. And a few years ago I found a new one, not on the site but in a flea market in Provence, but it came from Burgundy, a small sea urchin fossil on flint, and it's a denticulated tool made by probably by Neanderthal people. So what I want to say by all those very different examples, and I'm sorry for so much eclectic presentation, is that there is two ways to think about human evolution. One is comparing chimpanzee first hominid behaviors and tools, and the other one is to work on interaction. And in Gorowi, in Ivory Coast, we found next to the baobab, this baobab was in the center of a village. The village was abandoned, and when I found it, chimpanzee in the same place where the people used to live. And in that place, there is no clear interaction between a chimpanzee and people. But in some different places, like in Banco, the chimpanzee can use human artifacts. And a little train was in use at the beginning of the 20th century to extract logs from the forest. It was dismantled, and one railway part was just still in the forest. And I found it, the chimpanzee cracking nuts on this human special elements, because it was a sandy part of the forest. There is no rocks, no big roots, and the chimpanzee were using a human device. So by that example and by others, I'm just want to say that there is sometimes the possibility to have some interaction, because we leave artifacts in the environment, because chimpanzees are able to produce and to leave artifacts. Perhaps during the past we can imagine some interaction between species, not direct interactions. In some cases they are possible, but indirect through material culture. And you can see, for example, picture like that made by Anne Russon, she's a primatologist. She works on orangutan rehabilitation in Borneo, and you can see the capacities of the orangutan to handle this big saw, or using a comb, or using a mosquito spiral. I don't know how you call that in English. And she uses it. She blow on, and she uses it as a pen, mimicking a human being writing. So there is a lot of desire in some behavior, and we forgot this kind of behavior, and we watch only at intelligent capacities, intelligent manipulation, and we don't watch at the emotion in some uses. And for me they are very important. perhaps this last slide to show another discovery still in Montlignoquet. I was also following a female chimpanzee, and she was also shy. She wasn't properly habituated to people, and she was using this stone to crack Panda oleosa nut. And when I saw this stone, I said, that's unbelievable. I can't believe that. I just take it. I took it, and when I came back to the camp, I just cleaned it, and I saw it was a prehistoric tool. So this female chimpanzee was using a polyhedron, so it's a Homo erectus artifact. I don't know the age because it was impossible to determine the place, but probably 300,000 years ago, something like that. Homo erectus-like stone tool used by a female chimpanzee. So if you not only think in terms of interaction and of material culture, but it also in terms of time, and not in terms of, I will say, linear conception of time, but kind of folded time. This event means that a female chimpanzee met in certain way another time, another human being, a different species. So the reason why I put the word folded time, because like a piece of paper, when you just smash like that, you have different parts of the paper where it's just in contact, and different representation of time and interaction between intelligent beings. So I will stop on this particular image. Thank you.
Frédéric, you can answer the questions if you want from there, or you can come and sit down.
No, I just come.
I'll just say, over the years we've heard lots of mind-bending talks, but I think this might be the one that pushes us furthest.
So the floor is now open for questions.
Sorry, it was perhaps too exotic for you.
No, I heard part of your talk last night, but I had to leave. I'm the faculty member here. So, of course, I'm sure everybody here is thinking about that wonderful scene in Kubrick's 2001 Space Odyssey, where those apes throw up a tool that comes back as a television. Spacecraft, right? Okay.
Yes.
So, but that's folded time in Hollywood. But my question is,
It was a weapon.
it was a weapon. Okay, all right. So
A male vision of the evolution.
but it's I mean, I know that's popular culture and all that, but the idea of somehow that the chimpanzees are still using those. This woman, this female chimpanzee is still using a 300,000-year-old tool. I mean, how come, we've evolved and what happened to evolution? How does some species evolve and others not evolve? And does looking at the tools help? Because I'm wondering, what is the overall question that you have with this material? I mean, is it about evolution, or is it about the tools, or is it about us, or is it about them?
I think what we have to avoid is an linear conception of evolution. And chimpanzee helped me to think in different manner, human evolution and the evolution of technologies. That's the main lesson for me. Of course, there is evolution, there is involution, I mean regression. There is a lot of accident, and of course we are not alone during our main story. Now we are only one species, but 1 million years ago, 2 million years ago, we were several, and several primates able to develop technologies and different intelligence. The reason why I gave macaques and whales and dolphin example, because if we want to understand very well the roots of aesthetics, for example, we have to widen the scope and to understand the variability and the connection between cognition and objects. The reason why I took a non-object, I took body, I took feathers, I took different examples. There's not too many. I give a lot here, but we can add some, but there is not too many. So it's not so regular also. So it's peripheral activities, peripheral behavior for those species. But during 2 million years, it was, or 3 million years of human evolution, it was like that. Peripheric behavior, not main behavior. Even if it's chimpanzee, present day chimpanzee are using tools every day. So they are quite different. But bonobos don't use tools at all. But we taught chimpanzee how to make tools. So what we are doing when we ask bonobo chimpanzee to make flintstones, we are playing kind of very bizarre game. I disagree very much with experimental researches on this point, because they are not product of evolution. They show the potentialities of animals, but they don't show the actualization of behavior. And from this respect, more Darwinian.
Take you back to a question that you posed early on, that when you said that are there non-functional aspects to animal tools? And I don't feel that was that you. I don't really wanted to prove that you could prove it, but I didn't extract from your discussion.
Yes, I didn't develop
how that question might be answered. In that, a few of the examples you were using, whereby chimpanzees or apes were, well, with one where they used some body parts to display. That didn't seem to relate to the same question about a tool which is somehow beautified or made more efficient in a way that is not directly linked to its function.
Yes, I think you're right. I didn't develop that. Perhaps it's not so clever to put it in terms of functional or non-functional. Perhaps it's material or non-material. I mean, non-material, it could be related to communication or science or things like that. And it's functional in a certain way, because it's effective. I do comic. If I say I do that, or I use the big stone to amplify my willing and my as a function, communication in that way. But I'm more dealing with the non-material and stylistic things that I wanted to raise. For example, in France, if you are in Paris, you cut your tomatoes by like that. By slicing the tomato. In Provence, it's unbelievable. You don't cut tomatoes like that. You cut it by 4, and that's all. That's the difference. How to explain that? That's style. That's traditions. That's custom. That's all what you want. A way to do things in a community. And how to explain the meaning of this difference. I'm facing the similar question with chimpanzee or first minute. I didn't precise that, but during 1 million years of the older one period, we are not able to show stylistic variation in the choppers, in the stone tools. There is local variation related to materials, to stones, to availability of material, but there is no stylish variation, no style. So chimpanzees are, on that respect, are more culturated than Homo habilis or Australopithecus. So we face some new paradoxes. Sorry.
Well, so your identification then of the female chimpanzee deciding her choice to line up the nuts rather than just leaving them like that community that you identified traditionally did, you think that was a learned behavior potentially? That's a stylistic choice to organize your objects or your food in that way?
Potentially it's a routine, a task, a way to count the nut, to eat it in a particular way. I don't know.
Or the way you're instructed to do something. I mean, all these behaviors are.
Yes, it's all those behaviors are learned and transmitted from mother to children, and of course, in that way, they are traditional. There are choices they can make or not. This type of, and there belongs to particular community, and this female. She was coming just recent migrants from a different community, so I was very surprised by this new behavior. I never saw such behavior with chimpanzee nutcrackers. So
in the videos, you guys, are there different? You talked about how there's different ways to crack different kinds of nuts based on hardness, but do you also find that the videos have revealed? Are there different ways?
Yes.
We know early hunter-gatherers, depending on process of acorn grinding, they would use different depths of mortars in terms of processing. So do you find
for example, with Sierra Leone chimpanzee, people from Granada TV just make a documentary on chimpanzee and before the civil war in Sierra Leone. And I found those footages, and I was surprised. I saw some behavior of the Sierra Leone chimpanzee very different from the Ivory Coast. So we were using stone hammers, not on a flat side, but on a thin side. And they were using the stone not as a hammer, but as a knife. They were just cutting the nut. So perhaps now those chimpanzees are just gone away. There is no any more chimpanzee in that island. But it was very striking difference. So the difference is in a way to use the tool. It's not in the tool itself.
One more question, sorry. Is there a correlation then with environment that potentially that these different?
No, I only gave example where I monitor all the ecological or genetical differences on all those aspects.
Okay.
So,
I was going to say, depending on environment landscapes that they're dealing with, right? There's certain.
I make things equal before saying that.
In the last slide, the female chimpanzee using the
polyhedron.
Yes. You make the assumption that the chimpanzee chooses a tool that is effective, right?
Because its weight, its size.
And they have some experience of different kinds of stones for doing it. So do you think that it's possible that they can perceive, do they think of the polyhedron as a stone? Or could they perceive of it as a tool? In other words, do they make a distinction between a naturally found artifact and something worked by one of their own mates, let's say? And
of course, she found this stone because it was very affordable and good to fill the task. But perhaps also because it was rounded shape, beautiful to use. I don't know. I have no explanation. Is it an artifact or natural fact? Doesn't matter. It has a good quality to be used.
If that's a requirement.
But what about then, I mean, are there some instances that you have or other scientists have been able to find where, let's say with the digging sticks, right, that the chimpanzee can understand that it is not just a branch, but that it may have been modified by one of their own at some point? Does that occur?
Yes, they are modified. All, most of are modified, and they can recognize in some good and to bad tools. For example, with not with sticks but with stones, some female chimpanzee in Thai just leaves good materials to the infant. Under free, they just leave stones, and the infant is able to manipulate. After 3, between 3 and 5, the female just gives a good tooth. So good size, good quality, and so she adapts her behavior to the transmission according to the age of the infant. And after, she can even play some behavior, I would say, in a slow motion. She can show a child how to handle properly the branch, and she play the movement in a good way. So we had some observation at that time. So we know that some tool transmission are very, very fine. And they show, in fact, a model of behavior. And it works that way in Thai, but in Mondignokwe or in Bosu, it could be different. The female will play a different motion.
Okay, thank you.
No.
Just the mother with the dead child. I mean, that's. Do you think that the chimpanzee? Do you think they understand? Did they understand that it was dead and therefore was it a mourning ritual? I mean, you know, was it religious? Is it like the way we have our relics and pieces of saints and was there something magical about that, or was it?
No. It was very, very practical, but in most of cases, the dead animal is just kept for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, something like that, and abandoned. And in those type of forest, evergreen forest, it won't last for long because vulture, because leopard, so the dead body just fade up very, very quickly. But in that case, she kept the mummified body in the community for 3 months and a half. I can only interpret in terms of behavior. I don't want to add a ritual interpretation on that.
We recognize it was a choice for the mother to keep. I mean, the mother,
yes.
Made that choice. Right?
And she made that choice, and she shared the body with the other juvenile and other. And they were at the beginning. They were interacting, as you interact when you play with a doll, for example. And after all, it was just present.
But that's only one time, right?
We have other examples.
Of the same ritual?
Not.
That's the problem. I mean, that's the problem. I mean, most of the things don't have repetitive And then the question, if it doesn't have repetitive, how do you actually extract meaning, and in your case, extract potential function of the ritual if the ritual is not repetitive?
Well, just because we don't have a record of it doesn't mean it didn't happen another time.
On the other hand, that we don't have a record of it doesn't mean that it did happen another time.
Well, Frédéric, we say it's not ritual, it's behavior.
Behavior is a form of a ritual. If it is repetitive.
Yes, if it's repetitive, it's particular to a community, and if you can see the difference between one community and a different, I would say there is a special representation, a social representation of the behavior specific to the community.
Mm-hmm.
So, in that case, I will talk about a particular ritual because it's transmitted, it's discontinuous, and it's traditional in a way. So, in that case, I will categorize this behavior as a ritual. But in that case, only one case. But if we compare different chimpanzee communities, we observe specific attitudes to dead animals. In terms of attention, in terms of kind of mourning, they just have a lot of empathy, a lot of emotion. They can feel the dead. In some, we have several examples from captivity where we observe chimpanzee feeling that an animal is just going to pass away, and they just accompany for hours and hours, for nights, for days. And there is more and more attitude of that type. But not only with chimpanzee, with elephant. We have, but elephant, chimpanzee, whales, dolphin, and crows have the biggest, largest brain. Mm-hmm. So all those behaviors are related to some capacities of recognition, empathy, object construction. So we share that with other beings.
I think we would love to stay and talk some more about this. It's great and dazzling. Unfortunately, a bunch of us have to go to some
More dazzling.
faculty.
Much more dazzling.
Another repetitive exercise.
That is realistic and doesn't routine behavior.
Yeah, so but thank you
Humanity is
very much.
routine.